Sorry for the delay, everyone, and welcome. First of all, I want to really thank the Open Science SIG and the Open Science Room and all that you do for open science. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to present this. It's a great group, and so I just do a shout out for the Open Science SIG. So. So the title of this is The Interplay Between Brain Behavior and Cognition. I'm going to give a brief overview, just really quick, and then we're going to have a panel discussion with a number of questions. There were 6 different sites, 1 in Canada, 2 in the US, 2 in Europe, and 1 in China, who have participated in this project. And what each site has done has been to model the interplay between brain development, cognition, and behavior, and to create 3 different simulated data sets. One thing that's really important about these simulated data sets is that each of the site did this independently of the other sites. So they did it not knowing what the other sites were doing. And this data is made publicly available for people to essentially look to see what the different groups have, what their perception or their assumptions about how brain and development and the interplay take place. A year from now, or maybe even a little bit less, the keys to each of the sites will be released. So you'll know at that point in time what each of the sites embedded into their data. So there are a number of large pediatric neuroimaging cohorts, and this is a subsample of those that are available. But one of the elements, why create, with all these data sets, why create simulated data sets? Well, even though there are these large neuroimaging data sets, we don't have a gold standard. We don't have a gold standard, and so one of the ways to figure out what the gold standard is if you simulate data sets, you know you're programming into your design a certain gold standard. Later, these could potentially be tested with real data. So to give some examples. Oops, advanced too quickly. What's on my screen is different than. So just to give some examples of studies that have shown the relationship between brain and behavior from a longitudinal perspective is you can have delayed development, you can have slowed development, you can have delayed but then reach a certain peak, so catch-up growth, or you can have delayed development and stay low, or you can continue along a trajectory and then veer off from that trajectory. And these are just some examples of that. So, and the other thing is that it doesn't necessarily have to be related to a trajectory. You can have sensitive periods. You can do cross-lag panel models, which we've done with some of our data showing that actually we have a couple studies now, that one, and have found that rather than brain predicting behavior, it's behavior that predicts brain. And there was a symposium earlier about normative models with Andre, and that's another method that could be applied, and we've done that looking at behavior. So with that, just a brief summary of what the data variables that were programmed, and that is each site created 3 data sets of 10,000 participants per data set, 7 waves of data, There were certain key features that, that we provided each of the groups as they were figuring out how to program. And they could also put in, so there's demographics, there's also the possibility of missing, because if you have longitudinal data, missing is more the norm than the exception. This is all 7 structural variables, 3 continuous, pseudo-continuous behavioral variables, and 1 dichotomous autism, yes, no. So the timeline is shown here, and this is also on the website. So we've released, the data is available. You can download the data now. One site is still coming, but the rest of the data is out there. I was at the Brain Hack and was able to play around with a couple of the data sets, and had a group of us looking at the interplay. And I won't go over what exactly we found, because that's up to everyone here, but it was fun to look at the data. And what I realized is that one thing, if you're going to involve this data, is think about it beforehand. How are you going to systematically investigate the data set from the standpoint of neurodevelopment, the interplay, but also from an epidemiological perspective. So today we're having a panel discussion. I'm just giving a short presentation, and then I'm going to sit down. Neda's going to be facilitating, and we have a number of speakers who are going to discuss. And we have a broad range from postdocs to very senior people who are describing this project in general as the different sites. And finally, I'm going to do the QR code once. Okay, here's to access the data and study preprints. So one of the other things that I think it's important to say is approach the data as you would for any large developmental neuroimaging data set, not to try and figure out what each of the groups embedded, what model that they put into their data, trying to predict their model, because and we're going to, for each data set, you can submit a page per data set, and hopefully next year we're going to be presenting the results, perhaps in an educational session, perhaps a symposium. We've had talks about a competition, but we'll go from there. Thank you, and Neda, if you can invite the speakers up.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it's on now. Thanks everybody for being here. As Tonya mentioned, my name is Neda S, and I'm a research scientist in Tonya's group. We started this project about a year ago at OHBM, actually asking groups if they would want to volunteer and simulate data sets. And then here we have a representative from each group that have simulated data sets so far. And as being a person that also was involved in the simulation, I'm very excited to hear about their see what they went through and how the process went, and also have some questions to ask. And then we about half an hour discussion, and then we open it to the audience if you have any questions that you would like to answer. So at first, I will just ask each of the panelists if they can introduce themselves and their group that was involved, and give a short background about the background of the people that were involved. Were they technical, neuroscientists, developmentalists, and how you went about putting this group together?
Okay, yeah. I'm Vince Calhoun, and I direct the Trends Center in Atlanta, which is a neuroimaging and data science center. So our group had 8 people in it, and we basically just asked who was interested, in participating in this from the group. We have a good range of experiences. We have 3 students, 2 postdocs, a research scientist, and myself, and most of the folks were from a technical background, with 2 that were from more of had studied development before. So we kind of had a mixed group, which turned out to be very useful. And yeah, I guess we talked about this at OHBM last year, and Tonya twisted our arms and got us to contribute for this. So it sounded like a really cool idea. I like the idea of basically having sort of diversity in the generation of the simulated data as well as in the analysis, and so kind of figuring out that funnel effect and what can we learn from it. I guess that'll be a later question. I'll tell you about that, so I won't answer it right now. So anyway, I don't know if we want to list the names or they saw them on the screen, or it's probably enough. Yeah. So anyway, we had fun. It was a good group. There was a lot of discussion. I think they really enjoyed the experience, kind of working through this as well. So that was something else that I'll say.
Thank you. My name is Isabella van der Velpe. I'm a visiting postdoctoral fellow in Dr. White's group. So I'm with Tonya and Neda in the same group. I see a couple other members of our group here in the audience as well. So our team is at the National Institute of Mental Health. Aside from simulating the data sets, we are also doing a lot of the organizational work. So we have that expertise represented in our group as well. I think our group represents a mix of clinical data. A lot of very experienced clinical experts are in our group. We have some very solid neuroimaging knowledge in our group represented, and some biostatistics and epidemiology as well. So I think it's a good mixed bag. I will not speak about the simulation experience because Neda was the main person doing that. So I will just say a little bit about receiving the data sets from all the groups over the past couple of weeks. We had the privilege of receiving every single data set from all the groups that have participated, which was a lot of fun. It's really interesting to see what everyone's come up with. And we can talk about that a little bit more later on. I'm very excited to see what we will learn from the panel here as well today. So I'll give the word to you. You want to use this one? Maybe it goes on.
Okay, hi. My name is Anna Plachty. I'm at the research center in Jülich in Germany, and in our group we had complementary skill set, which was really nice. We had experts on brain behavior, relationships, but also very technical, and 2 of us were also into development. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I think we learned a lot from the project. And yeah, I'm excited to hear about the experiences.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here to represent the group from Nijmegen, the Netherlands. I'm Emma Sproten from the Donders Institute and the Radboud University Medical Center, and we were a group of 4 people: Rogier Kivet, Ethan McCormick, and Leah Michel. And I was mainly involved in just throwing ideas at them and then reviewing what came out of this in terms of code and graphs, and then slowly making adjustments. But I have to say that Ethan McCormick and Leah Michel did most of the modeling and really the fine-grained execution of this project. And I'm representing them, so I have some notes in terms of what they were thinking and what their experiences were as well. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Zixuan Zhou from Beijing Normal University. I'm currently a postdoc from Xinian Zuo's lab. Xinian is also here. He sits over there. And I'm very glad that Xinian gave me this opportunity to participate in the project. And we together discussed a lot on how to simulate the datasets. And personally, I'm leaning more, I think, the technical side. And our lab focus on investigating brain development, especially for childhood and adolescence. So I think our group is a combination of a technical side and the development side. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think one of the main questions that I'm very interested in, what were some of the challenges that you ran into? I think, Zishan, you were involved in doing the simulation. So I think I will ask you that. And also Anna, I think you also were involved in doing the simulation, right? So maybe you guys can speak about some of the challenges that you ran into or what decisions you had to make during the simulation.
So, okay, I'll start. I think the greatest challenges for simulation is to determine ground truth. As actually, currently there are no such kind of data set, so we can't have some precise priori information for that. So on the first part, we extract the mean trajectories from the Nature, the brain chart paper published in Nature. Yeah, so we extract trajectories from that paper, and that's a main part for the ground truth. Also, we investigate extensively for the literature. So we try to extract some common knowledge for that. And I also ask a lot of questions to ChatGPT. And I ask, how do you think the two variables are correlated? Or what do you think the noise there? And but I don't trust ChatGPT, but I will, based on the information ChatGPT provided and combined with the things I find in the literature and finally determine the ground truth, I think is the greatest challenge.
I must confess, I also use ChatGPT, but then it's like, okay, can I get some resources or references and then go check the references? So.
Yeah, actually, I can only agree. I think the challenges were actually very similar. So at the beginning, it was just for us also to get the numbers, right? Like what is the range of the distribution and how does the distribution look like? So I think we spent a lot of time also looking into other studies, meta-analysis, just to see what is the minimum or the maximum of the intracranial volume. For example, you kind of like, if you switch the perspective from actually analyzing the data versus creating the data set, you realize that you take a lot of things for granted, right? You just start looking into the data set, and here we actually had to really think hard and to compare what is already existing, and also to realize that there is a huge gap, especially in neurodevelopmental studies, and also studies of very small sample sizes. And then the question arises, okay, how much do I really trust it? What is my own experience with the data sets or analyzing data sets? Which much smaller sample sizes are the pattern that I see from my own work? Can I maybe exaggerate them a little bit, to make my point? So it was like a very big trade-off of, making discussions, and hopefully getting a little bit better to the ground truth or underlying biological patterns. Let's see.
Yeah, which that leads me to the next question. It's like sorry, Emma, did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add from our group. I think one challenge was missingness, because there is a relationship of missingness with different variables, but how to define it exactly was hard. That's Ethan McCormick. He did most of that missingness simulation. And another thing was the multivariate covariance, because you can model everything based on previously observed effect sizes pairwise between different variables. But then when you go look at it, you obviously introduce correlations between the variables. And so, of course, it's best to think about that multivariate covariance in advance, I think. But that was, one of the challenges we observed,
So one of the things that was raised was about looking at the data in the literature and basing it on that. But I guess how well do you think the measures we currently have about brain, behavior, cognition represent the ground truth? Do you think we're close? I mean, I don't know, maybe the brain size would be easier, but maybe some of the, psychometric things are the questionnaires, like really capturing the underlying behaviors that we're trying to analyze. I don't know if anybody wants to take that. You want to go, Isabel?
Yeah, I think this is a question that we all struggle with, right? We know all the issues that are currently going on in replicability, in neuroimaging studies. If you even, with the big data sets that are out there, where different scanners are used, we know that a different scanner can already have a really big effect on your brain imaging measure. So we know, of course, from all of the research that we do, that there's always noise in all of our data, not just the imaging variables, but also in our behavioral variables and in cognition. We'll also always have some error in our measurements, and whether that's random or whether that's dependent on your outcome variable, that really determines if you can trust your findings. So I think as much as I would like to say, yes, there are big population-based studies, they will get very close to the ground truth. I don't actually think that's the case. There was a good talk this morning also about diversity and equity in population-based studies that also touched on those topics. Our studies are not, as much as we design them well, it's really, really hard to come to the ground truth. So I think we have a long way to go. And this project will be really interesting to see if even with the ground truth, we can approximate those variables and those models that we deliberately made. So I don't know if someone else wants to.
Sure. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think in terms of ground truth, so one of the things that was hard for us was finding models that we could use to generate data that were consistent with the data that we had, and with some of the longstanding trends that you see in the field, and that would model interactions and things like that. So all of those things, together was sort of a combinatorial problem. It's like kind of, setting parameters on a scanner where you change one thing and everything else changes after that, right? So, that was a lot of discussion, right? And so I'm sure we did. I think we felt confident that we have kind of a good sort of fair way of doing it. But I also feel like that there could be different ways of doing it, right? So I think there could, coming out of this, could be some sort of white paper on how to generate simulations in a fair way, right? So I think in terms of the consistency with what we used as our ground truth, I think our models are close to that, right? Because we designed them to be, right? As to whether what we're using as our ground truth is actually a ground truth, then that's another question which I don't think we can answer. So probably not, but yeah, anybody else want to?
So one of the things that actually for me trying to decide, like a lot of times I feel like in the field, a lot of papers talk about brain predicting behavior. I mean, Tonya had in her slide something about with cross-lag behavior predicting brain. I guess, what do you think of that? Like, does brain predict behavior, behavior predicts brain? Do we have methods to actually capture that? Can we go? Sure, Emma, go.
Yes, I've had this conversation before with Ryan Mutzel, who was previously working with Tonya on the Rotterdam, the Generation R study. And we've also found this in the neuroimage study, which is a longitudinal study of people with ADHD. And there we also found more evidence that changes in symptoms and impairment in ADHD also precede some of the brain changes. And we didn't really see anything in the other way. So yeah, both effects are very subtle, but if they are there, but we have only found the evidence the other way, similar to what Tonya already mentioned. So I think that is a very interesting question. It probably goes both ways, but it might depend on the nature of the mechanism, whether you can detect it or not. Yeah, that's what I think, yeah.
In the data with our group simulated, there are obviously connections between brain and behavior. And when we set in the ground truth, we determine the brain first, and then we determine behavior. But the behavior is not certainly dependent on brain. It has its own parts. It has its own structures, and there are also some random factors we simulated that are totally not related to brain. But if we would want to see the direction, whether the brain determines behavior or behavior determines brain, I think is not related to the simulation, right? And we first determine the brain and then determine the behavior. There are correlations, but we just simulated that, but it doesn't really decide what the real mechanism is.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, for the simulation, we're deciding and we're embedding that.
Yeah.
But in reality, I guess,
But in
what
reality, yeah.
What do you think is happening? And do we have the tools to actually find that out?
I think there
Hard.
requires intervention, right? And many other techniques.
I think what's going to be interesting as part of this is, as you all analyze data and speculate on what the underlying mechanisms are in the data that you analyzed, how close is that to what we put in there, will tell us something about what we do when we look at real data, right? So that's, I think, going to be really interesting and probably very surprising. So.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what we find or what people find. So, so here we had less than 20 variables to play with, and actually 10 of them were related to brain, cognition, and behavior. But even that, just the combination of those, as some of the panelists have pointed out, like gives you many different combinations to try, and the interaction and all the stuff. What do you think about, do you think it will be useful to even add more, to do more complex models that actually would represent the reality? Or do you think this would be a good, I guess maybe a good start to go and see how close we come with the models? So.
Yeah, I would say it's, I'd say it's a good start. I think it's still only a start, right? Because I would say we really need to have genetic factors, and we need to have functional factors in there, and also network type information. All those things, different scales, gets very complex. But having those in there, I think, will give us a more realistic moving to, more realistic than what we have now, not realistic in reality, but a little bit closer, right? So I think those are the main things that I would layer on top of this as a starting point. So you could kind of keep this going, keep adding layers as you, right? So, right.
Yes, I mean, I can only agree. I think it's a very good starting point, and sometimes kind of like at the beginning, it was maybe also a little bit overwhelming to think about all kind of interactions and variables. And then you have at some point also to decide, okay, what makes maybe more sense, what would we like to focus on? But then when we kind of were at the end, I also had the impression, we had the feeling, oh, it could be a little bit more, or it would also be interesting to look into other variables. So I think with projects like these, if they continue and add other layers, I think it's a very promising way to go to learn about also our maybe internal assumptions. And yeah, so thank you. It was a really good starting point.
Thank you. I think more variables and more complex models and the complex interactions, I think they would obviously make sense, right? But there are trade-off problems here. Is that what are the things we would like to focus on, and what are the variables or kind of patterns, mechanisms we would like to infer with the data, because there are infinite possibilities, and if there are much more variables and the interactions with them will also increases, and I think maybe the conscious between different groups may less overlapped. So that's the problem. And maybe if we would like to have more variables, we could settle more rules for different groups. So we have to obey that obey these rules, or we have to have more restrictions for the data. So I think that.
You're assuming that we're going to overlap at all, right?
Yeah, I was thinking, I think maybe I'm thinking along the same line, or in our group we were thinking that maybe not just adding individual variables, because everybody will have, there are lots of different interests and everybody will have their own favorite variable. But now we are establishing a framework in which this can potentially be simulated. So maybe kinds or classes of variables can be put in sort of, and so people can say whatever they want to study, my variable is continuous, or it has this kind of relationship, or this kind of longitudinal or not longitudinal changes. So maybe just have a structure for kinds of variables that can be simulated and integrated. That would be an idea. Does anyone else? Yeah.
Maybe also I would like to add in terms of what variables to consider and how many. I think maybe it's also a little bit of a blind spot how we maybe are used to do science and how nature really is. So for example, let's assume we had an education variable and we are kind of focusing on that. But then at the end, the question is, do we consider, because we are talking about kids that were simulated, right? So it's a developmental study. Then the question is, okay, are we looking at the education of the mother? Is it more important maybe? Or are we looking at the education of the father? Or do we combine both, right? Because they are kind of building maybe a family, but there is also some kind of diversity in how families are structured. So then you're at the point where you kind of like think maybe me as a researcher being used just to have one educational variable, which is kind of averaged across both parents, but it does not mean that maybe the education of one of the parent is actually driving some kind of trajectory in, I don't know, one brain region or two or whatever. So I think we are kind of also a little bit shaped by what we used from literature and other data sets.
I was just thinking it might also be interesting to have some sort of intervention built in, like, so you could do some causal modeling or something like that, right?
Yeah. Now, speaking of modeling, so we mostly talk about statistical modeling, and nowadays with a lot of machine learning, what do you think? Because usually machine learning is used for prediction, but do you see a use of machine learning in this case with the simulation when people are analyzing and trying to figure out the patterns in the data?
Yeah, I would say yes. I kind of think of them as all the same, right? You can use it, you use different models. You can use statistical models for prediction. You can use machine learning for prediction. So it's just an issue of kind of flexibility of your modeling and also training and things like that, which can play a role in many cases. But so yeah, so I think I would say yes to that. Yeah.
I think we're in a really interesting time with machine learning to see in which different domains it can be applied and will be applied. I think we're kind of on the cusp of using it in more causal settings versus prediction only. And that, I think, will be something really interesting to see when hopefully a lot of groups will analyze the data sets, is how they will use their knowledge of these machine learning methods and other methods to figure out the patterns in the data set, not just using prediction approaches, but more causal inference based models. Since we're not aiming to find a prediction model, right? We're trying to find the underlying patterns. So if someone is able to use machine learning to make that happen, I think that would be really great. I would be very excited to see it.
So I think machine learning could be very promising for analyzing the data sets, and but the big challenges there is that how to interpret these models obtained with machine learning. And I think there are also strengths because each group have 3 data sets. So the training data and the test data, there are plenty of room for that case. And in real world data, we often faces the sparsity of data. So it could be a very good opportunity for people to test their machine learning approaches, I think. And also, because we simulate the data, we set in the ground truths. So we clearly know there are relationships, and maybe strong relationships between brain and behavior. And we can see if these models can reliably detect that.
Okay, I think one last question before we open it to the audience. What would you like or expect to see this project moving forward? Like, what excites you, and what do you find particularly interesting?
I think learning, like, we really want to learn more about kind of neurodevelopment in the end. So I think kind of seeing how, just as we do on the analysis side, how do we ask questions that are relevant versus just asking a question, right, that you get an answer for and you do something with. But how can we design these simulations and use them in a way that can really tell us something, that's meaningful about development that we can use later. So, I think thinking about what those questions are, this might help us, kind of to do that, I think. And I would say also, given that there are, I'm excited about the potential of using these methods in multimodal settings, right? So there's a number of large data sets, and there are lots of different modalities that are collected. So you could certainly, I think it's feasible to use that information to help design simulations as well, just as we did with the volumetric data for this study. So kind of using that to put a more complete picture, again, different parts of the elephant, and try to put those together and learn a little bit more complete information. So.
I think one of the most exciting parts of this project is just to see how different groups of experts think so differently about these variables and the interplay between brain and behavior. As I said, we've received all the data sets now. You can look at them yourself. Hopefully after the session, you'll take a look at our OSF. You'll also find a preprint of the paper there, which shows a couple of graphs. Maybe some of you are already looking at it. Shows some graphs of the different brain and behavior variables. And it's just so interesting to see how different they are across all the groups, and even within groups across the data sets. So that's one really interesting part, to see which assumptions do people have, how did they model them into their data sets, and what does that tell us about neurodevelopment in the end, and how we should approach the real world data. That's one really exciting part. The other really exciting part is this new stage that we're gonna enter into is inviting the community, all of you people here, to find these patterns and to see what everyone comes up with. I know there are so many creative people out there who could probably really help us move forward, and I'm really excited to see that next stage. And hopefully you two are too.
Yeah, I think there are just many, many exciting things coming out of it. Also having the first insights. Yeah, I think multimodality was mentioned already. I think after the project, I have more questions than answers. I think it was mentioned already that it's really pushes you in the position of thinking about, okay, what do researchers have as their assumptions, right? And I was also thinking, okay, could we maybe push the project also a little bit further, and maybe also, I don't know, create dashboards and ask many people with really diverse backgrounds, could they just kind of draw a line how they think that specific brain regions and behavior might change across age. And then also to see, okay, can we maybe also converge if we would have really thousands of people ask, right? And also maybe with different backgrounds behind it and maybe levels. Do we converge on the same patterns? So I'm really now interested in how do scientists actually think about brain behavior and brain development in kids. Yes.
I'll start first. Okay. I think for future perspectives, one thing excites me, I think, is to maybe we can see some updates on both simulating and analyzing these data sets. So after more evidence emerge, we may update our simulation according to these new evidence. And also for analyze, maybe when we analyze these simulated data sets, we may find some methods are better than others. So we could summarize for the lessons learned from that, and could really beneficial for our future practices.
I'll add one a little bit too, which is I think kind of amplifying your point, which is looking at where we're in common and where the differences were, kind of what are those degrees of freedom and what we can learn about those different pieces. And also I think it's a potential collaborative opportunity, right? As we all kind of did this independently, and then maybe we can do something together to further take it to the next level. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah, just where our assumptions are, where the common factors are, and where things different. Just want to ask the people in the audience, do you have any questions about the simulation? Hope you're excited to try to do the analysis and download the data.
I'm allowed to ask a question. So, and I'm going to ask a question and not have you tell me anything about how you programmed it, but just if there's something that you thought about it. So one of the ways that we think about it is, one possibility is that you have 10,000 people and everyone are following a similar pattern. So, but life may not work that way. You might have clusters of individuals that show a relationship that go one way and other go another way. So my question is, number one, just did you think about that? Was that involved in your discussion or not? And number two, what are your thoughts of throwing all these 18,000 individuals then into one data set and then doing an analysis with everything? Or is it, I mean, my thought is originally to keep it separate, but what do you think that's too much?
I think that's cool. I like that idea because you could sort of naturally model heterogeneity by using the differences in the models that we have and just kind of throw it all in. I also think it would be fun to take the models that we created and fit data. Say we pick a few data sets and say, how well do these models fit? Do they work? We've looked at different data sets, I'm sure, probably some of the same data sets, and I don't know exactly, right, what we all looked at. So that would be, so maybe if there's a data set that we didn't use, that could be a criteria that we didn't use it to generate our simulation, but then it's sort of an independent evaluation. We can see how well they work. So anybody else want?
Hey guys, thanks for such a wonderful project. And I was always thinking about this project, in nature. So all the data we analyze now, we call real data. Actually, we created them, right? But not simulation, right? For example, for cognition, right? Cognition is something not like brain or behavior. That's more real. We can touch it, we can see it. But cognition, actually, human being define what is cognition, and then we created data, or we call it measurement, right? And it's the way of a different way of creating the data. And the simulation is great because we know what we exactly know what we are creating, right? But the difficulty for we call it real data is we don't know that, right? But I always thinking about the different levels of the complexity of the data we created, right? Is different. Especially for behavior, and we are all behavior differently, I think, in some way. And so my question is about how we bring the simulated data to the some data we also created, like cognition, right? Maybe the cognition data we created are far from the real data we normally think, right? So this is the challenge of the thing we are doing. We want to build the association among the three, right? But cognition is something we created, right? So maybe there's a way we can build the. I was thinking maybe more reasonably to do brain and behavior relationship, and then put cognition data aside, or treat cognition data like a simulation data. Right? So another thing I wonder is the scale of the simulation project we are doing now. So we're only 6 or 7 groups. How about we get this to 1,000 groups or 1,000, individuals? Think about it, do this simulation. And then based the simulation data as Winston and Tonya just raised. So the differences across these simulation projects is something we are looking for. Exactly. I mean, even we're talking about this simulation project, but it's still our brain doing this, and it's our behaviors, right? So the real difficulty, I think, is how we really collaborate together to understand these data and also the outcomes from our simulation, right? So is any clue? I mean, yeah, we can't, not ChatGPT something, right? It's thinking, our brain thinking, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for all of those thoughts and the question. And I think it's a really crucial point. Right? We're going through all these different layers of abstraction, right? We're simulating data about data that we as humans kind of made up almost, or find important and enough to measure. And then when does it become meaningful for the real world? And when you said like we are only 5 or 6 or 7 groups, it kind of made me think of the sample size issue in all of our neuroimaging studies, right? We are a very small sample size, even though we have these big simulated data sets with really big samples. We are only 5 groups. So maybe if we have 1,000 groups, like you said, then we'll come closer to, we'll regress to the mean altogether, and we'll find the thing that's closest to the truth. But probably now we're still like very much on like we have really big variability between our groups and within our groups. So it will be really crucial to collaborate and really find the middle ground.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to that happening.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was like very good question and comments. And I'm looking forward to see how our assumptions are. And as we get more people who are involved, that hopefully it will converge, maybe. We'll see. Just some last remarks. So as Tonya mentioned, we will have, we're asking groups, whoever wants to analyze the data, to download the data, analyze, and submit an abstract. We will have the site open soon. We will have it through GitHub, so it would be just like a Word document of what you found. We're hoping to have it by the end of this year, so sometime in December, so that we can apply for, we're planning to have an educational session next year at OHBM to kind of look at all the submission and see what we got essentially. And each group will look at the data for that. So each group will evaluate the analyses for themselves as we think, because this was a very open-ended, we allowed each team to design the simulated data however they saw fit, and we don't know about each other's assumptions. So each group will look at their own data and come up with a ranking. And hopefully we will have multiple papers. And so that's it. Thank you all. Also, we have some flyers on the table here with the timeline if you're interested, and the QR code for our website.